Good evening. Thank you for joining. We're going to start in a few minutes. We're waiting for more participants to join. Welcome to community meeting number 1 for the Dela Cruz Boulevard, Lick Mill Boulevard, and Scott Boulevard Bicycle Improvements Project. I'm Ivy Morrison, serving as the moderator for this evening on behalf of the City of Santa Clara. This meeting is being recorded. Seeing a few more folks join. I'm going to give it another couple of minutes, give people time to log on, and then we'll start. For those who are just joining, we're going to be starting in a minute or two. We're just giving people time to log on. Welcome to community meeting number 1 for the Dela Cruz Boulevard, Lick Mill Boulevard, and Scott Boulevard Bicycle Improvements Project. I think we can start, panelists, in 1 minute. If you're all ready, seeing head nods, that's great. We'll give it 1 more minute. Okay, let's start. So officially, thank you for joining this evening. Welcome to our first community meeting sponsored by the City of Santa Clara for the Dela Cruz Boulevard, Lick Mill Boulevard, and Scott Boulevard Bicycle Improvements Project. I'm Ivy Morrison, and I'm serving as the moderator for this evening on behalf of the City of Santa Clara. I'd now like to introduce Ralph Garcia, project manager, who's going to introduce the project team.
Thank you, Ivy. Good evening, and thank you for joining us tonight. My name is Ralph Garcia. I'm a senior civil engineer with the City of Santa Clara Department of Public Works and project manager for this project. We also have Steve Chan, transportation manager, here tonight. Mike Liu, assistant public works director, and Nicole He, associate engineer, are also working on this project. Our project consultant is Kimberly Horn, and we have Adam Dankberg and Zachary Esquivel that will be presenting the project details. As you already met, Ivy Morrison from Circle Point is moderating tonight, and I'll hand it back to Ivy. Thank you.
Thank you, Ralph. So we're just going to go through a few quick housekeeping items so that we can have a productive meeting. So a few reminders about Zoom. Participants can rename themselves. You can change your name. First name and last initial is what we recommend by clicking on that participant's icon that's shown, the arrow is pointing to it. And that way we will know who to call on if you ask a question later on after the presentation. Next slide, please. So question and answer, there are a few different ways that you can answer a question. We invite you to type your question even during the presentation, and we will answer it after the facilitated Q&A verbally. So we'll read your question, and one of our panelists or several of our panelists will answer it during the Q&A. Or you can raise your virtual hand using the raise hand icon in Zoom, if you would like to speak during the Q&A. So we ask you to please hold off until after the presentation. And if you're calling in, you can press *9 to request to be unmuted and to also ask your question live. And now I'm going to hand it over to Adam Dankberg.
Thanks, Ivy. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us tonight for this community meeting. We'll be talking through the project purpose and overall process. We have a number of slides focused on the study area today. We'll be talking through next steps and then happy to answer any questions that you may have. So starting with some background about the project. This project was actually funded by a federal earmark in 2022. That federal earmark of $2.7 million covered the project study, design, and construction. The city put up about $354,000 in local funds. The project does have some tight project deadlines, though, that go along with that federal earmark. So we need to complete environmental clearance and completion of the design by September 2025, so less than a year away. And then the project has to be fully constructed by September 2030. So it takes a while to get things built, of course, and so these are pretty aggressive deadlines. So this project will be moving ahead quickly, and we're really focused on delivering this project for the city in this timeline. The project study area includes De La Cruz Boulevard, Lick Mill Boulevard, and Scott Boulevard. Lick Mill extends between Tasman and Montague Expressway, or the study portion of Lick Mill is between Tasman and Montague Expressway. The study portion for De La Cruz is between Montague Expressway and Trimble. And then the study portion on Scott Boulevard is the longest portion. It's from the western city limit, where it turns into Arquez, all the way down to Saratoga Avenue near the southern city limit. The purpose of the project is to install bikeway facilities on these three roadways. The 2018 bike plan prepared by the city identifies the desired bike facilities on these corridors, and that's our guide for this project. The project purpose is also to improve safety on these corridors, as well as close gaps in and really fully expand the city's bicycle network to these roadways. The types of improvements on these roadways will generally consist of Class 2, Class 2B, and Class 4 facilities. So to give folks who aren't familiar with those designations a little background, we have some pictures on what these types of facilities can look like and feel like. So on the left is a Class 2, which is just a traditional bike lane. So there's no buffering or separation. It's just the bike lane is next to the traffic way, the travel lanes. It may be between parking in the travel lanes or maybe just along the curb if there's no parking. In a Class 2B, it's fairly similar, except for there's an extra buffer area between the bike lane and the travel lane. So there's that striped area in that middle picture that separates the bike lane from the drivers, and that gives the bicyclists a bit more comfort by being a little further away from the fast-moving vehicles. And then finally, the highest quality bike facility of these is a Class 4 bike facility or a protected bikeway. And that one has the buffer, but it also has these bollards that are located in the buffer area that really provide additional protection and separation between the cyclists and the vehicles. There are different types of separation, but given the project budget and schedule, we would be likely looking at treatments similar to this one for the Class 4 facilities on this corridor. So for folks not familiar with the 2018 bicycle plan, it did recommend improvements to bicycle facilities throughout the city. The map on the right side of the screen here shows those recommendations, and we have highlighted the three corridors that are within the study area for this project. The bicycle plan recommendations included Class 2 and Class 4 bikeways on De La Cruz. So again, that's Class 2 is the striped lane, Class 4 is the buffered area with the vertical bollards and separation. Class 4 on Lick Mill Boulevard. And then on Scott Boulevard, a portion would be Class 2B, which is the buffered bike lanes. And that's the northern portion, north of Monroe, and then regular Class 2 bike lanes south of Monroe due to less space in some of those areas. So for the overall planning process, we are still pretty early on the project. We're in phase 1, which is where we're collecting a bunch of data around parking and traffic information and roadway geometry, and we're developing alternatives. So we have some initial alternatives that we're currently working on, and we'll be coming back to this group or to anybody who would like to join us next month at community meeting round 2, where we'll be talking through those alternatives, as well as we will be performing an evaluation of the alternatives, and we'll have those results to share with the community next month as well. So phase 2 is the evaluation of those alternatives. Phase 3 is where we undertake a process to select a preferred alternative. This includes taking the alternatives to the Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Committee in January and to City Council in February. And these dates are really critical in order to meet the overall funding deadlines. And then once the preferred alternative has been selected, then the city will perform environmental clearance and begin work on the final design. So the timeline for this particular phase, the planning phase of the study, is shown here on the screen. This project was first brought to the BPAC, the Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Commission, back in June. And we have been back to the BPAC 2 times since, so 3 BPAC meetings thus far. We're here for community outreach round number 1 tonight. As I mentioned, we'll be coming back to the community with details on the alternatives and the evaluation results next month at community outreach round 2. And then we'll be going to the BPAC for our 4th BPAC meeting in January, followed by City Council in February, where a preferred alternative will be selected. To provide a little bit more detail on the approach to actually defining the preferred alternative, the first step is to collect data and conduct parking and collision analysis on the corridor. So we have collected information about collision history and parking utilization and turning movements for vehicles, pedestrians, and bicyclists on each of these corridors. We want to gather community input. We're here tonight, and we'll be coming back to the community next month, and that input will be shared with the BPAC and City Council to inform their selections. And then based on that community input, as well as analysis of the parking and traffic effects of the improvements, that will inform our proposed roadway designs, basically the alternatives. Then we will present the plan to the council, which will include the community input that we receive, the technical analysis on the collisions, traffic analysis, parking impacts, et cetera. The relevancy of the corridor improvements to the overall bike plan. And then it's really up to the City Council to decide how the plan moves forward into design. Because this is already funded, the project has an opportunity to move forward if the council so chooses and selects a preferred alternative to advance. So now talking about these corridors in particular, the idea is to add bike facilities, either regular bike lanes, buffer bike lanes, or class protected bike lanes. In order to do that, we need space to put in the bike lanes. So there's 3 primary ways that we get the space in order to fit in the bike lanes. We are not proposing to modify sidewalks or acquire any right-of-way. So we aren't going to be impacting MA's houses or businesses or anything like that. We're not going to be narrowing sidewalks. All the improvements will occur from the curb to the curb within the paved area. So the 3 ways that we actually find room to fit in the bike lanes are either by narrowing lanes, if the lanes are really wide today and we have room to narrow the lanes, or if we remove a parking lane on one or both sides of the street, or if we remove a travel lane on one or both sides of the street. And so basically one of those 3 options is needed in order to fit in the bike lane improvements. We do want to note that while cyclists certainly will benefit with the bicycle lanes, there are also benefits for all the roadway users to safety. Because we are either narrowing lanes or removing traffic lanes, it has a potential to calm traffic by reducing traffic speeds and reducing conflicts between cars and both bicyclists and pedestrians. So there are some benefits to all users, not just cyclists, with this project. So to talk through how we will actually achieve the space needed for these improvements, we'll walk through each of those kind of roadway modification options that will be applied to each of the corridors. So the first one is parking removal. So in this, basically, if the roadway has parking on one or both sides of the street, it would be removed on one or both sides and that space reallocated to the bicycle facility. So what's shown on this cross section here, and the top one is existing conditions where there's parking on both sides. And then you can see on the one below it is the proposed condition. In this case, that 10-foot parking lane gets reallocated to a bike lane on both sides of the street, and we are able to preserve parking on the other side of the street. So we do some lane narrowing to get all the width we need, but we would remove parking on one side and preserve it on the other side. For lane removal, In this case, some of these roadways are 4 lanes today with no center median or no center turn lane. And so the idea would be to repurpose one travel lane in each direction in order to provide both a center turn lane to help facilitate turns. It could be left turns to streets. It could be turns into and out of people's driveways, just to make it easier to turn onto and off of the corridor. And then we also use the available space generated by the lane removal to provide the bike lanes in each direction. So again, on the top is sort of the current condition, and this may look familiar to many of you for the corridors that we have discussed. And then the bottom one is how it would look with the road diet. So the 2 lanes get converted to one center turn lane, and then the other lane, the one lane basically gets converted to the center turn lane, the other one gets split between the bike lane in each direction. In this case, we are able to preserve parking on both sides of the street. And then finally, the last option for some of the roadways within the study area, the lanes are fairly wide today, particularly on the northern portion of Scott. And so we are able to achieve a buffer and a widening of the bicycle facility simply by reducing the lane widths. So taking 14-foot lanes down to 11-foot lanes, for example. So we aren't touching the median at all. We aren't touching the curb. We're just reallocating the space in the asphalt paved area to reallocate that to provide more room for the bicycle lane and the buffer. So those are the general treatments that we'll be looking at for each of the corridors. And now we'll be talking through the characteristics of each of the corridors and where some of these types of treatments may apply. And so for that, I will be handing it over to my colleague, Zach.
Thanks, Adam. Yeah, so we're going to take a little bit of a deeper dive and look at each one of the 3 study corridors. And so we'll start with De La Cruz Boulevard. So De La Cruz is a 4-lane roadway with a posted speed limit of 35 miles per hour. There is on-street parking on both sides of the street, and a key point of interest on this corridor is Montague Elementary School. The north part of De La Cruz is characterized by residential land use on the north and then industrial land use on the south. And then you can see that 4-lane roadway in that bottom cross section there with 2 lanes traveling northbound, 2 lanes traveling southbound, and then that on-street parking on both sides of the road. And then on this next slide, we can see kind of an aerial of the north side of De La Cruz, and that is from Montague Expressway to Montague Park. And to make room for new bicycle facilities on this corridor, we expect to need to remove a travel lane or on-street parking on one side of the street. And then traveling south on De La Cruz, this is where it is more industrial in character, and that's from Montague Park to Trimble Road. And for this part of the corridor, we expect to need to remove a travel lane or on-street parking on one or both sides of the street to make room for those new bicycle facilities. Moving on to Lake Mill Boulevard, this is also a 4-lane roadway, but as we can see in that cross section on the bottom part of the slide, Lake Mill has a large median separating the northbound and southbound travel lanes. Lake Mill Boulevard also has a 35 mile per hour speed limit. And then there's on-street parking on both sides of the street north of Laird Circle and one side of the street south of Laird Circle. And some points of interest along this corridor are the Santa Clara Ace Station, the Ulastack Natural Area, and the Don Callahan School. And then Lick Mill is mostly characterized by residential with both single and multifamily housing along the corridor. And on the next slide, we can see from the aerial and the street view that center median that's separating the northbound and southbound lanes. And similarly, we expect to need to remove travel lanes or on-street parking to make room for new bicycle facilities on this corridor. And then the longest corridor of the night, Scott Boulevard. So starting in the northwest section of the corridor, on the west side of the city limits where Scott turns into Arquez, heading east to Martin Ave. Scott is a 4 to 5 lane roadway, depending on if it has the center median or has a center turn lane. And a little bit faster here, Scott has a posted speed limit of 40 miles per hour on this segment of the corridor. And there actually are existing bicycle lanes along the corridor, this part of the corridor today. And this part also has mostly commercial land use. And since we actually have the existing bicycle lanes today, we do not expect to need to remove travel lanes or parking for this part of Scott. but the existing travel lanes today are wider than the minimum design standards. So we expect to narrow those existing lane widths to make room for some safer bicycle facilities on this part of the corridor. And now heading south on Scott from Martin Ave to Monroe Street, Scott turns into a 6-lane roadway with a 35-mile-per-hour speed limit. And it also still has existing bicycle lanes on this part of the corridor. And if you're familiar with this part of the corridor, it's actually a bridge deck over existing railroad tracks. So when we go to the next slide and we look at the aerial view, we can see those railroad tracks crossing underneath Scott. And so for this part of the corridor, we expect to need to remove a travel lane in either direction to improve safety for those existing bicycle lanes. Continuing south, Scott Boulevard from Monroe Street to Homestead Road, Scott turns into a 5-lane roadway with a 35-mile-per-hour posted speed limit. There's on-street parking on both sides of the street. And a point of interest here is Scott Lane Elementary School. And this part of the corridor also has a mix of commercial and residential land uses. On this next slide, we can see the commercial on the east side and the residential on the west side. And so since we don't have any existing bicycle facilities on this part of the corridor, we do expect to need to remove either travel lanes or on-street parking on one side of the street to make room for those new and improved bicycle facilities. And then the southernmost part of our study area, Scott Boulevard from Homestead Road to Saratoga Ave. Scott here is a 4-lane roadway with a 35-mile-per-hour posted speed limit. There is on-street parking on both sides of the street, and this is characterized by residential land use. And similarly to the segment above, since there's no existing bicycle lanes today, we do expect to need to remove travel lanes or on-street parking from one side of the street to make room for these new bicycle facilities. And that is our study area. So I think Adam's going to go ahead and talk about next steps here.
Yeah, thanks, Zach. So thanks for walking through the study area. I'm sure folks have a lot of questions about the alternatives and all that, and what we are about to dive into that and perform traffic analysis and parking studies, collision analysis to really learn more about the corridors and the options and develop some recommendations for how to actually fit in these bicycle facilities. So this was just sort of an introduction. This meeting was really focused on introduction to the project, introduction to the study area, the types of treatments that we will be looking at. And then next month, we really encourage folks to attend, because then we'll have a lot of that details that folks are probably most interested in terms of what are the effects of taking a traffic lane and what are the effects of losing parking on one side of the street and so forth. So we are about to be hard at work on that analysis and look forward to sharing those results next month. Again, we'll be going to the BPAC in late January 27th. So mark your calendars for that. And then a city council meeting in February with all the information to select a preferred alternative. So to talk more about some of the upcoming outreach activities, I'll hand it back to Ivy.
Okay, thank you. So yeah, we're just getting started. In addition to the meetings that Adam just mentioned, we have a number of community pop-up events coming up. December 6th, Santa Clara Tree Lighting Festival, December 7th, Santa Clara Farmers Market, and December 10th for De La Cruz Boulevard and Lick Mill Boulevard meeting at 6:30, December 11th for Scott Boulevard, 6:30. And those meetings will be a hybrid format located both at City Hall Council chambers and also available via Zoom. So you have some options for participating, and additional details can be found on the project web page. And there's a QR code coming up in the next slide. And please look out for an upcoming survey. So ways to stay involved and informed. You can check the project website for event updates by going to santaclaraca.gov/bikeped projects and click on the link. And I think you can all read it. It's all of the corridors that we've been talking about. Send us an email, sebikeproject@circlepoint.com. Call and leave a voice message at 408-620-6566. And definitely please attend future community meetings and pop-ups and other engagement activities, and watch out for that online survey. And if you scan the QR code, you will get to the webpage that we've been talking about with additional project information. So now we want to hear from you, and we're going to transition to the Q&A. I see a few questions already popping up in the Q&A icon in Zoom, and a few reminders. You can use that icon to type your question, and we will read it out loud and answer it in just a minute or two. Or you can raise your virtual hand to ask your question. And if you're calling in, you can press *9 to request to be unmuted and to ask your question via phone. So thank you for listening so attentively. Thank you to our panelists. And we're now going to go to our questions from you. So Betsy has a few questions that have already come in. The first one is, when changing a 10-foot parking lane to an 8-foot parking lane, is there any requirement that a vehicle parked on that street be narrower than the parking lane? And if so, is it ever enforced? Some of the larger pickups seem to extend into the adjacent bike lanes, even when parked close to the curb. So Adam, you ready to take that one on?
Yeah, that's a good question. So first thing I'll note is the standard width for a parking lane is usually around 7 to 8 feet wide. So kind of the most typical parking lane width is 8 feet. That really accommodates pretty much any sort of standard vehicle, car, light truck, SUV. 8-foot width gives them plenty of room to get close to the curb and stay out of the bike lane. Sometimes parking lanes are as narrow as 7 feet. So with the 8-foot lane, we still get a little bit of extra width. Of course, there are sometimes trucks and RVs and things like that don't fit quite as well into an 8-foot lane. So want to maybe see if Ralph or Steve have any input on any city policies around parking of larger vehicles.
Thanks, Adam. No, I think the California Vehicle Code says you can park next to a curb as long as you're not blocking traffic, including bike traffic. So if there is a large vehicle that obstructs a travel lane or encroaches into a bike lane, that's not allowed. Now, it's up to a responding officer to determine if a vehicle is actually encroaching into a lane. So I'm sure it's up to their interpretation. But basically, the vehicle code says you can't obstruct traffic if you're an oversized vehicle parking next to a curb.
Thank you. So another question from Betsy. Will the improvements come with pavement repairs? Scott has some rough pavement over the tracks and just south of Central, which is itself a hazard to bikes. So Ralph, I think that's a question for you.
I can take this one. So thank you for the question. Yeah, so when we put in, well, for the most part, when you put in new bike facilities, we need to ground off the existing striping to make sure we can put in the new striping with the bike lanes on good pavement, so it's clear. So with that, there will be some pavement repairs when it's ground off. There will be a seal or some sort of pavement treatment that we'll put over the top, and then we'll put in the bike lanes after that.
I do, this is Steve Chen. I do want to chime in because the funding for this project is limited. This wouldn't be a full pavement rehabilitation project. We will make spot localized repair of the pavement where there's failure, but this project is focused on bike improvement, not a pavement rehab project. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So Gavin, you posted a question and you also have your hand raised. I'll read the question that you typed. Can the location for Lick Mill events be moved to the North Side Branch Library, which is within a block of the study area and near the VTA light rail? The bike network today doesn't yet connect this area in City Hall. And I think that's an Adam question.
Yeah, we had actually, that was our first target was Northside Library. That was our first expectation for this project to hold the meeting. We reached out to them and coordinated with them. There was a couple challenges with that site. One was it wasn't really set up for a hybrid meeting, so there just wouldn't be really a way to do the virtual component to allow folks to participate virtually. And then second, because of the library operation, we had very limited hours of when we could actually be in there, and it wasn't quite enough time for us to feel like we could properly connect with the community. So because of that kind of time window and the virtual aspect, that's where we end up reverting back to City Hall. But yeah, it was a good idea. We had the same idea. It just, the logistics didn't quite work out.
Yeah, thank you for the suggestion. Sean has a question. Will the road be repaved in the process? I know some parts of the bike lane on Scott Boulevard bulges or sinks in the bike lane, which forces me into the car lane. And that's a Ralph question.
Yeah, thank you. As we mentioned, there'll be some amount of repayment work done with this. And also Steve mentioned that the budget for this is very limited. So this will be first and foremost a bike installation project. But there will be some treatments for the pavement.
Great, thank you. Next question from Tom. Parking of trucks and Google buses are an issue that bikes are confronted with. No parking signage is needed in the industrial area. Will there be information? And Ralph, is that one that you can answer? Are you clear on the question?
I'm not clear on the corridor where the Google buses.
Yeah, maybe Tom, could you type which corridor? We can unmute you and you can tell us which corridor you're referring to.
Yes, hello, there's Tom. I'm just really concerned about buses and trucks parking in the bike lanes. This seems to be a real problem for me. When I'm using a bike lane, I have to now veer out into the middle of traffic, and I find it extremely hazardous because the cars are moving at speeds and they just don't expect the bicyclists to come out on them. And Google buses are very common. They park anywhere they please. So we need signage for that. Can you assure us that there'll be signage?
Okay, yeah, thank you, Tom. I understand the question now. Yeah, so if we do put in bike lanes and there is no parking, then I think our standard sign or one of our signs is the bike lane, no parking sign. If it's a class 4, they're not supposed to be there anyway because we'll have the flexible posts. So yeah, anywhere there's a bike lane next to a curb, there shouldn't be any parking.
Okay.
And yeah, thank you both. Eliza has a follow-up comment stating that she knows that there are Google buses on Lick Mill Boulevard because you run into the same issue. So thank you for the affirmation. Next question from Kevin. Lick Mill Boulevard will be extended to pass the office light industrial area planned as part of the Relate project and will connect with other streets for increased traffic flow. How are plan changes in traffic flow addressed in this bike lane project? So specific to Lick Mill, does anyone on the panel care to answer?
That's a good question. Steve, do you want to answer this one?
Yes, I'll answer this question. As I mentioned, Related is a parcel north of Tasman East. That's essentially the former dump location and the BMX track location. The current approved project for Related include a Lick Mill extension all the way towards 237 freeway. However, they Related are coming back to the city to amend their project. So they amended the proposed amendment project will no longer include a through street going entirely extending from Lick Mill all the way up to the SR 237 freeway area. So the traffic volume is not anticipated to increase significantly with the related project. So we don't anticipate it's going to impact this section of Lake Mill Boulevard south of Tasman Drive at this time with this project.
Great, thank you. Gavin has another question. How will the parking study on Lick Mill consider the current game day parking restrictions? What about the current surge in parking due to the nearby construction near Lick Mill and Tasman? And that's I think it's a city question, Ralph or Steve.
Yeah, thank you for that question. Yeah, so our consultant Kimley Horn did a parking analysis. We'll be sharing those results at the next community meeting. In particular, the game day restrictions, nothing, if we're going to keep parking on Lick Mill, nothing will change with those game day parking restrictions. They will remain as is. There is a surge in parking construction. We were out there last week and we noticed it. So we're trying to determine why there's such a high parking demand, and we'll definitely be looking at that more.
Excellent, thank you. Let's see, I see a new question popping up. Good discussion, thank you. Gavin, another Gavin question. Thank you, Gavin. I understand this study does not have funding to modify signalized intersections. Is it possible to make modifications to the stop sign controlled intersection at De La Cruz and Clyde? This intersection is dangerously close to the Montague right turn lane.
Yeah, I don't know what type of modifications. It looks like Clyde is stop controlled and De La Cruz is not. So I don't know if that's a request to make it an all-way stop. Being it's very close to Montague, that wouldn't be possible because you would have a queue going back to Montague Expressway.
An all-way stop wouldn't be possible.
Right. But we could take a look at that to see if there's any other improvements with this project.
Great, thank you. By the way, in addition to recording this meeting, we're also taking detailed notes, and we're going to be posting a summary of this meeting to the project webpage in the next week or so. So we are hearing you. It looks like Tom. Tom, are you unmuted? You're popping up on my screen.
No, I'm sorry. I shall mute myself.
Oh, that's okay.
Okay.
You didn't have another question?
Well, I think you asked. I do have a question.
Yeah, since you're here.
I find particularly large intersections to cross an intersection in a left turn lane. I find drivers are not patient with the bike turning left, and I really feel like a green marker, a green corridor is needed to advise people. There are bicyclists that are making left turns within this large 4-lane or whatever intersection. Is there any provisions for that? Are there any proposals to do that in intersections? In other words, dotted lines or corridors or some indication that the bicyclist can at least follow. Over.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good question. If it's a striping related improvement, we can look at that. We don't want to just end the bike lane in advance of an intersection and let bicyclists figure out where they need to go. I think the intent is to bring the striping all the way to the intersection. There is limited funding, as we mentioned, to make any real significant changes to any of the signals, but it will be something to make sure we put in the bike lane safely at through intersections.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, I see a new question. Betsy, how much of the Scott interchange at El Camino does Caltrans own, and how much is the city's? Can we coordinate so that there's a continuous facility?
Yeah, so, oh,
yeah.
is there a response?
No, I think Sean was
Oh,
commenting on Tom's previous.
okay, yeah, so El Camino, it was Scott and El Camino, correct? Is that the location?
Yes.
Yeah, so El Camino is a Caltrans facility. So we can make improvements on Scott Boulevard. Of course, we need to coordinate with Caltrans when we put those improvements in, because their intersection is controlled by them. But as long as we're not modifying the signal, they should be okay with any of the improvements we suggest. But we do have coordination that we would need to do.
Very good. Thank you. And a new voice to the conversation, Edmund. Edmund, you have your hand raised. We're going to unmute you so you can ask your question. There we go. Looks like. Can we unmute Edmund?
Yeah, I think we're connected
there
now.
You go. Okay, great.
Just following up on the discussion that you had with the BPAC team not too long ago, I'd like to reiterate that for those of us that commute or ride for pleasure on a recumbent trike, the buttons that activate the crossing light need to be within reach of the rider who's sitting low to the ground. And many of the crossings have like a protective tunnel for a pedestrian poles on this island, and there's actually no way that a trike can get in that narrow gap to push the button, and it's very dangerous to get on and off a trike in the middle of a heavy traffic flow. So besides the remediation for any crossings that are subpar, that feature, the quality of the crossing access needs to be considered for any new plans. Not to mention that recumbent trikes require a little more width, and it's because there's three wheels, two side by side, about 3 feet apart. One of those wheels running in the gutter is very dangerous because that's where all the broken glass and sharp objects tend to end up. So some of the current street crossings, particularly those that go over railroad crossings, have about a 2 foot or 2.5 foot space, which puts the outside wheel of the trike into the traffic because of the current markings. I'm thinking of the one on Scott. So I just wanted to share that with all of you so that who is ever planning the striping and the layout of these bike routes considers all riders, not just two-wheelers. That's all I had for now. Thank you.
Duly noted. Thank you. Ralph, did you want to comment?
No, I just wanted to thank Edmund for those comments. We'll definitely keep them in mind when we move to the design phase.
Great. Thank you for the comment. Any other questions or comments? Give you a minute or two. Let's see. Crossing buttons need to be accessible. Yeah. Thank you. Give you a couple of minutes or another minute to think about it. You can always submit your questions after the fact, after this meeting. We absolutely welcome them. So Gavin, Gavin has a new question. Could the study consider streamlined bike traffic exiting to the schools and parks, even if the park and school portion cannot be completed at the same time as the roadway improvements?
I wonder if we can get clarification by streamlined.
Yeah. Streamlined bike traffic exiting to the schools. Gavin, do you want to come off mute and clarify?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Thanks. I mean, I expect the schools to be relatively high traffic areas, especially for bicycles. If this project and the rest of our bike plan and bike network are successful, um, to the extent, especially with schools, that there may be traffic trying to get off the road into the school, either via an existing uh, car accessible access point, or through a park on a sidewalk, something like that. And of course, we don't want a lot of traffic going onto sidewalks that weren't designed for this. But just kind of trying to bring up whether we can future proof just this paint, even if that's all we're doing, even with accelerated timeline, and knowing that maybe it's not finished, but we built the road portion of this so it's ready for whenever something comes around on the school or park portion.
Thank you, Gavin. I can take a little bit about this. It's a very good point. A lot of the parks that have been built, or the newer parks, have sort of a path that leads to the park facility or around it. So there are some parks that have that feature. For schools, it's a good point. If there's not a bike lane now, there probably isn't a facility to allow bicyclists to come up into the school. But maybe with future planning, that could be a consideration for another project. But it's a very good observation.
Thank you. Still open to more questions or comments?
But I do appreciate everyone's questions and comments. I do hope you are able to join us at the next meetings in December. We'll have more data and information to share, and maybe even some concepts. So please do that. See, another question came in.
Yes. Is there a plan to correct access to Stacked from South Drive at Monroe?
So Monroe's not part of this project. We do have another Monroe project that might be a part of that one, but Monroe is not part of the 3 corridors we're looking at for this study.
Okay. Thank you. That was from Edmund.
And for those that don't know, STACKed is San Tomas Aquino Creek Trail.
Oh,
The acronym for that.
give it another minute as you think of more good questions and comments. And if not, we're going to remind you of how you can ask questions and stay informed after this meeting. So, ways to stay involved. Check the project website for event updates. SantaClaraCA.gov/bikeped projects. Send an email, sebikeproject@circlepoint.com. Call and leave a voice message, 408-620-6556. And absolutely attend future community meetings. They're right around the corner. They're coming up in December, and stay informed. You can use the QR code as a quick shortcut to the project webpage. And I think that is it. Thank you so much for your participation, for the great questions, and we hope to see you again next month.